In the vast tapestry of 20th-century literature, few novels resonate with the same philosophical depth, lyrical intensity, and historical weight as Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago. This is not merely a sweeping historical epic set against the tumult of the Russian Revolution and its aftermath. It is a profound meditation on the individual's place within the crushing machinery of history. The central inquiry of this narrative is clear: how does Dr. Zhivago articulate the tension between personal identity, artistic integrity, and love on one side, and the impersonal, often violent, forces of political ideology and state control on the other? Pasternak's masterpiece unfolds through the life of Yuri Zhivago, a poet-physician whose inner world of emotion, ethics, and aesthetic sensibility becomes both a sanctuary and a battlefield. As revolutions ignite, empires fall, and new regimes rise, Zhivago remains committed not to any political creed, but to the sanctity of individual experience, to what he calls life itself. This commitment places him in irreconcilable conflict with the collectivist ethos of the Bolshevik state, which demands ideological conformity and subordinates personal truth to historical necessity. Crucially, Pasternak does not deliver this conflict through dry polemic or ideological treatise. Instead, he imbues the novel with an extraordinary lyricism, poetic prose that transforms snow-covered landscapes, fleeting glances, and whispered conversations into vessels of metaphysical meaning. It is through this lyrical lens that the novel resists historical determinism. Where the state seeks to erase subjectivity, Dr. Zhivago affirms it. Where ideology reduces human beings to class categories or revolutionary agents, Pasternak restores them as feeling, thinking, loving individuals. Thus, Dr. Zhivago emerges as a radical act of literary resistance and assertion that the soul of a single person matters more than the grand narratives spun by power. The novel invites us to witness how love, especially in the figure of Lara Antipova, becomes a form of defiance. How poetry becomes a testimony of truth, and how the individual, even when crushed by history, can leave behind an indelible mark of authentic existence. To fully grasp the significance of Dr. Zhivago, we must first establish the precise meanings of several key concepts that animate its structure and themes. Lyricism in the novel refers to the infusion of poetic consciousness into narrative prose, emphasizing inner experience emotions, memories, sensory impressions, and metaphysical reflections rather than just external observation. In Dr. Zhivago, lyricism is not ornamental, it is structural, saturating descriptions of nature, time, and human relationships with symbolic resonance and emotional depth. Transforming a winter forest into a metaphor for spiritual solitude or a train journey through war-torn Russia into an embodiment of civilization's disorientation. This persistent lyricism allows Pasternak to elevate personal moments into universal truths. The conflict of individual versus state is the novel's central philosophical conflict, reflecting a timeless struggle between autonomy and authority, conscience and coercion. In early Soviet Russia, this tension becomes existential, with the state claiming to represent historical progress while enforcing conformity and suppressing dissent. Yuri Zhivago, representing the individual, resists this absorption through forms of non-violent resistance such as his refusal to serve as a political commissar, his silent withdrawal from public life, and his private commitment to writing poetry, posing the critical question of whether a person can remain morally and artistically free in a society demanding total allegiance. Historical trauma, in this context, denotes the psychological and social rupture caused by rapid, violent historical change, such as the Russian Revolution, which shattered identities, families, and worldviews. Dr. Zhivago captures this trauma not through statistics but through intimate scenes like a child orphaned in Moscow's frozen streets, a woman searching for her husband across warring front lines, or a man recognizing his lover amid chaos, revealing how macro-historical forces fracture private lives. Narrative subjectivity is Pasternak's method of grounding history in personal consciousness, filtering events through Zhivago's perception rather than offering an omniscient account. History is presented as a series of disorienting, often random experiences, what one scholar describes as chance encounters and second-degree relationships, challenging the Soviet claim to historical inevitability by showing history as contingent and chaotic to those living it. Finally, poetic realism, a mode perfected by Pasternak, blends meticulous historical detail with metaphysical depth. The novel accurately depicts the socio-political transformations from 1905 to 1922, including the collapse of the Tsarist order, the rise of the Soviets, the Civil War, and the famine. Simultaneously, it transcends mere documentation. imbuing everyday objects with symbolic weight and heightening reality to honor both historical and spiritual truth. Boris Leonidovich Pasternak, 1890–1960, was not just the author of Dr. Zhivago, he was its spiritual prototype. Born into a prominent intellectual family in Moscow, Pasternak was immersed from childhood in art and ideas, shaping his belief in the sacredness of creative expression. Initially drawn to philosophy, he studied under Hermann Cohen in Germany, encountering German idealism and neo-Kantian thought, which instilled a deep reverence for subjective experience and individual moral autonomy, themes that would later permeate Dr. Zhivago. Though he abandoned formal philosophy for poetry, his work retained a metaphysical dimension, seeking the spiritual essence beneath surface reality. As a poet, Pasternak emerged as a leading figure of the Russian avant-garde, his early verses seen as dense with metaphor and sensory intensity, capturing the inner pulse of an era undergoing radical transformation. His intellectual lineage also included Spinoza, whose pantheistic vision of God in nature, where divinity is found in the immanent beauty of the world, resonates throughout Dr. Zhivago and became Pasternak's ethical foundation, placing him in opposition to Marxist materialism. When the revolution erupted, Pasternak welcomed the fall of Tsarist autocracy but recoiled at the violence and dogmatism of the Bolsheviks, believing art and truth could not be dictated by political authority. This stance made him suspect in the eyes of the Soviet state. By the 1930s, as Stalinist repression intensified, Pasternak survived by withdrawing from public literary life, focusing on translation and private writing. It was during these years of internal exile that he began Dr. Zhivago, a novel he knew would never be published in his homeland. The decision to write a work so fundamentally at odds with Soviet ideology was an act of integrity, not rebellion, aimed at exposing the human cost of ideological absolutism. When the manuscript was smuggled out of the USSR and published in Italy in 1957, it ignited an international sensation. The Nobel Prize in Literature awarded to Pasternak in 1958. Cited for his important achievement both in contemporary lyrical poetry and in the field of the great Russian epic tradition, recognized his dual legacy as poet of the soul and chronicler of the age. The Soviet response was swift and brutal. Pasternak was denounced as a traitor, subjected to public vilification, and forced to decline the prize under state pressure, a moment of profound humiliation that underscored the very conflict his novel had dramatized. To understand Dr. Zhivago is to enter the vortex of one of history's most transformative and traumatic periods: the collapse of Imperial Russia and the violent birth of the Soviet state. The novel's timeline stretches from the 1905 revolution, a failed uprising against Tsarist autocracy sparked by Bloody Sunday, when peaceful demonstrators were gunned down outside the Winter Palace, through World War I, the February and October revolutions of 1917, the ensuing Civil War, 1918–1921, and into the early Stalinist era. This was not a linear progression but a cascade of overlapping crises that upended every aspect of life. The 1905 revolution exposed the fragility of the Romanov dynasty, leading to the creation of the Duma, Russia's first parliament, and signaling the awakening of mass political consciousness. In Dr. Zhivago, this period appears in the background of Zhivago's youth, a time of intellectual ferment and social unease. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 intensified the crisis, with millions of Russian soldiers dying in futile offensives while the home front faced shortages and collapse. By 1917, public patience had evaporated, leading to Tsar Nicholas II's abdication and the end of over 300 years of Romanov rule, with a provisional government promising democracy. However, the October Revolution changed everything. Led by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, an armed insurrection seized key institutions, promising peace, land, and bread, withdrawing from the war, redistributing land, and nationalizing industry. This victory was not the end of conflict but the beginning of civil war from 1918 to 1921, with the Red Army fighting the White Army, and foreign powers intervening, turning the war into a proxy conflict. The human cost was catastrophic, with millions perishing from combat, famine, and disease, while towns were destroyed and families scattered. The Bolsheviks, facing annihilation, instituted the Red Terror campaign of mass executions and repression targeting perceived enemies, labeling entire social classes as counter-revolutionary. It is into this maelstrom that Pasternak plunges his characters. Yuri Zhivago, though sympathetic to ideals of justice and equality, is horrified by the violence and dogmatism of the new regime, seeing how revolution devours its children. Lara, his lover, shaped by personal trauma, remains a symbol of resilience and moral clarity. The novel does not take sides in the red versus white struggle but portrays both as caught in the same cycle of violence. What matters is not which side wins, but what is lost: human dignity, love, art, and the quiet moments of meaning that make life worth living. Pasternak's portrayal is not one of political judgment but of existential witness. Showing history as a series of interruptions to ordinary life: a train halted by partisans, a wedding disrupted by bombardment. A poem written in hiding. In this context, Dr. Zhivago becomes more than a novel. It is a testament to the endurance of the human spirit in the face of historical catastrophe and a lyrical cry for the individual in an age that sought to erase him. Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago stands as a defiant monument of literary innovation, rupturing the rigid conventions of its time in form and spirit. At a moment when Soviet literature was expected to conform to socialist realism, Pasternak crafted a novel that was deeply personal, introspective, and poetically charged, resulting in a hybrid masterpiece, part epic chronicle of Russia's tumultuous early 20th century, part lyrical meditation on love, art, and the soul's resilience. Pasternak, a renowned poet, infused the novel with unmistakable lyricism, where prose often dissolves into poetic reflection, famously including a cycle of poems attributed to Yuri Zhivago. These verses are the novel's emotional and philosophical core, offering a counterpoint to the chaos of revolution. By blending narrative and poetry, Pasternak created a universal text of cultural memory. This fusion of forms marks a decisive break from the Soviet literary mainstream, where socialist realism demanded clarity and didacticism. Dr. Zhivago embraces ambiguity, subjectivity, and moral complexity, unfolding through fragmented timelines and serendipitous encounters that resist the neat teleology of revolutionary progress. Pasternak's modernist sensibility is evident in his focus on interiority. Yuri Zhivago is a doctor, a poet, a seeker whose journey is one of spiritual and artistic survival, not political awakening. The narrative structure mirrors this inner quest: non-linear, contemplative, and rich with symbolic resonance, stunningly rendered in its evocation of mood and memory. It is precisely this refusal to conform that made Dr. Zhivago a target, dismissed by the Soviet state as literary trash. Yet it was this very lyrical depth and formal daring that earned Pasternak the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1958. A decision so politically charged that he was forced to decline it. Ultimately, the novel's greatest innovation was its insistence that truth resides not in ideology, but in the individual's capacity to feel, remember, and create. At the heart of Dr. Zhivago lies a profound and enduring conflict: the individual versus the state. Yuri Zhivago, a man of conscience and compassion, is caught in the relentless machinery of 20th century Russian history. As the world collapses into ideological warfare, Zhivago clings to a simpler, more human truth: that life is measured not in party loyalty or class struggle, but in love, art, and moral integrity. Zhivago's struggle is existential. He is sympathetic to the ideals of the revolution, yet as it hardens into dogma, he becomes alienated. The state demands total allegiance, seeking to absorb the individual into the collective, to erase personal memory, private affection, and artistic freedom. Zhivago resists through silence, evasion, and the quiet act of writing poetry. His medical vocation becomes a metaphor for his moral stance: he heals bodies while the state seeks to control souls. This tension manifests in intimate details: where one lives, whom one loves, what one says. Zhivago's refusal to join the Red Army, his retreat to the countryside, and his love affair with Lara are acts of quiet defiance, illustrating his struggle between revolutionary duty and personal authenticity. His friends, like Misha Gordon and Nika Dudorov, embrace the new order with varying convictions, but Zhivago remains an outsider, suspicious to the people who come to power. Pasternak, through Zhivago, articulates a humanist individualism, a spiritual and artistic integrity that transcends politics. Zhivago's poetry becomes his true legacy, a testament to the enduring power of the self against the crushing weight of history. Echoing Pasternak's belief in the importance of being true to oneself. The state in Dr. Zhivago is a dehumanizing force, reducing people to categories, while Zhivago sees them as individuals worthy of dignity. His ultimate tragedy is the impossibility of living freely in a world that no longer values the soul. Lara Antipova is one of the most poeticized women in Russian literature, a symbol of resilience, beauty, and national suffering. From her first appearance during the 1905 uprising, she is portrayed as both witness and participant in history. Strong-willed yet vulnerable, shaped by trauma and unwanted advances. Yet Lara is no passive victim; she is inquisitive and ambitious, driven by a passion for learning and self-determination. Her decision to volunteer as a nurse is an assertion of agency, and her connection with Yuri Zhivago is spiritual, intellectual, and artistic. She becomes his muse, the inspiration for his poetry, and the embodiment of humane poise. Feminist readings of Lara emphasize her autonomy within deeply patriarchal structures. She navigates a society where women are often reduced to objects, yet insists on her own path. Her relationship with Zhivago is one of mutual recognition, a love that transcends social expectation. Symbolically, Lara represents the duality of Russia itself, brutalized yet capable of inspiring profound love and resilience. Some critics interpret her as an axis mundi, a spiritual center around which the novel's moral and emotional energies revolve. Her presence illuminates how personal love stories can illuminate sweeping historical change, offering a counter-narrative to impersonal revolutionary forces. Moreover, Lara's character is rooted in Olga Ivanskaya, Pasternak's lover and muse, who suffered imprisonment and persecution. In this sense, Lara is a testament to real female endurance and love that persists even when erased from official history. In the frozen landscapes of post-revolutionary Russia, love becomes an act of rebellion. The relationship between Yuri Zhivago and Lara Antipova is a sustained affirmation of humanity against dehumanizing forces, unfolding in stolen moments where the state's gaze falters. Their affair, though small in duration within the novel's vast timeline, carries immense power. A love born of mutual recognition, a meeting of souls in a world that seeks to fragment identity. When they are together, time slows, the noise of revolution fades, and they reclaim a fragile space of freedom. This love is not escapist but deeply moral, resisting the collectivist imperative to dissolve the self. While the state demands loyalty to the party, Zhivago and Lara remain loyal to each other, affirming the enduring value of personal connection. Their relationship is a passionate cri de coeur, Pasternak's voice crying out against the spiritual poverty of totalitarianism. Even their separation becomes a form of resistance. Lara is taken by the secret police, Zhivago dies alone, heartbroken. Yet their love persists in memory, in poetry, in the child they may have conceived, suggesting that such love cannot be eradicated. In a world of army revolts, irrational killings, starvation, epidemics, and communist party inquisitions, their love is a quiet revolution that preserves the essence of what history often destroys, the individual soul. The capacity for tenderness, and the belief that one life, one love, can matter. Boris Pasternak arrived at the novel not as a prose traditionalist, but as a poet whose verse had already been recognized as a condensed expression of the power and character of his era. In Dr. Zhivago, this poetic inheritance is structural. Pasternak achieves a strict unity between his lyrics and his narrative, forging a prose style that breathes with the rhythm, compression, and metaphorical density of poetry. Where conventional realist fiction relies on linear exposition, Pasternak's sentences foreground their own musicality, line-like cadences, deliberate syntactic ruptures, and a tension between meter and meaning that forces the reader to slow down and inhabit the moment. The prose operates through marked language, where metaphors, metonymies, and sensory juxtapositions are packed so tightly that summary becomes nearly impossible. This is not ornamentation but epistemology, by treating historical trauma and intimate longing through a contemplative, image-driven lens, Pasternak transforms the novel into a medium of documentary lyricism. The narrative does not simply record events but recreates the emotional and physical resonance of living through them, elevating personal experience into metaphysical reflection and proving that the individual consciousness, rendered through poetic language, can hold its own against the sweeping, impersonal narratives of state history. Against the backdrop of the Russian Revolution and its ensuing civil war, Pasternak positions nature not as mere scenery but as a philosophical and spiritual domain that outlasts human ideology. The novel's recurring natural motifs, snowdrifts swallowing railway tracks, ancient forests standing indifferent to gunfire, the cyclical return of spring, function as carriers of moral clarity and permanence. While political factions fracture and rebuild society according to rigid doctrines, the natural world operates on a deeper, regenerative timeline. Pasternak's vision of history nature is particularly evident in the first half of the novel, where the scent of linden blossoms, the melt of winter ice, and the sudden violence of summer storms are woven directly into the fabric of human fate. This is not escapism, it is an ontological stance. As the state apparatus demands ideological conformity and historical determinism, Zhivago turns inward toward contemplation and the pursuit of interior perfection. Nature becomes the sanctuary where the individual spirit can breathe, a space where the ephemeral noise of political slogans dissolves into the enduring silence of the earth. In Pasternak's hands, the natural world is neither romanticized nor passive but an active, almost sacred counterweight to historical destruction, offering a vision of transcendence that neither party manifestos nor artillery fire can erase. The seasons do not march, they return, and in that return lies the novel's quiet rebellion against the myth of irreversible historical rupture. The 25 poems appended to the end of Dr. Zhivago are not an afterthought but the novel's emotional and metaphysical core. Attributed to the protagonist, these verses function as the inner life that the prose narrative, constrained by plot and historical chronology, cannot fully articulate. Structurally, they draw heavily on liturgical and biblical frameworks, employing a solemn, incantatory rhythm that echoes orthodox chant and scriptural lamentation. Poems such as Gethsemane and Hamlet are particularly revealing, framing Zhivago's personal suffering within archetypal narratives of sacrifice, fate, and artistic witness. The Gethsemane sequence, for instance, maps the protagonist's acceptance of mortality and historical burden onto Christ's agonized prayer, transforming personal despair into a meditation on redemptive surrender. Meanwhile, the Hamlet poems explore the tension between private conscience and public performance, mirroring Zhivago's struggle to maintain artistic integrity in an era demanding ideological uniformity. Thematically, the collection orbits around love, mortality, spiritual resilience, and the sacredness of individual consciousness. Formally, the poems rely on compressed imagery, stark contrasts, and a deliberate avoidance of rhetorical excess, allowing silence and implication to carry as much weight as diction. Together, they complete Pasternak's project of providing a total definition of life. Where the prose chronicles what happens to the individual in history, the poetry reveals what happens within the individual despite it. The verses are the novel's hidden pulse, beating beneath the surface of narrative to affirm that the human spirit, when articulated through lyrical truth, remains ungovernable. The fate of Dr. Zhivago outside its pages proved as dramatic as the events it chronicled. Completed in 1955 and deemed irreconcilable with Soviet ideology, the manuscript was suppressed by state publishers. Pasternak allowed the text to be smuggled to Italy, where it was published in 1957, igniting a backlash. Soviet authorities condemned the novel for its perceived bourgeois individualism, Christian undertones, and refusal to glorify the revolutionary vanguard. The state's reaction was geopolitical. The West hailed it as proof of Soviet spiritual bankruptcy, while the USSR denounced it as a CIA-backed ideological attack. The irony was profound. Pasternak had written a deeply personal, spiritually grounded work about the sanctity of private life, only for it to be instantly drafted into the propaganda machinery of two superpowers. The controversy culminated in 1958 when Pasternak was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Under immense state pressure, facing threats of exile, he was forced to publicly decline the honor. Decades later, it would be revealed that Western intelligence agencies had indeed covertly distributed Russian-language copies of the novel to undermine Soviet cultural authority, further complicating its legacy. Yet beneath the political theater lay a quieter truth. Years earlier, Pasternak's attempt to call Joseph Stalin had revealed the fundamental incompatibility between the poet's contemplative worldview and the state's demand for utilitarian certainty. Dr. Zhivago survived censorship, exile, and instrumentalization not by winning a political battle, but by refusing to fight one, enduring by returning to the irreducible value of the individual soul, the lyric word, and the quiet persistence of nature long after the revolution's echoes faded. When Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago was first smuggled out of the Soviet Union and published in Italy in 1957, it detonated like a literary bomb across the ideological frontline of the Cold War. The novel, a sweeping elegy to the individual soul caught in the crushing gears of historical upheaval, was immediately denounced by Soviet authorities as ideologically poisonous. The Writers' Union condemned it for its anti-Soviet stance, its lyrical skepticism toward revolutionary violence, and its refusal to glorify the collective at the expense of personal conscience. Pasternak was subjected to a national campaign of vilification, expelled from the Union, threatened with exile, and pressured into declining the Nobel Prize in Literature he was awarded in 1958. A decision that became one of the most infamous acts of cultural coercion in modern history. Yet in the West, the novel was hailed as a masterpiece of moral and artistic resistance. Critics praised its poetic density, its psychological depth, and its courage in bearing witness to the human cost of the Russian Revolution and its aftermath. The Nobel Committee recognized it as a significant achievement in contemporary lyrical writing, a phrase that underscored not only Pasternak's background as a poet but also the book's deeply internal, introspective mode. Dr. Zhivago was less a political manifesto than a lyrical meditation on love, loss, and the persistence of beauty amid chaos. This duality, condemnation at home, canonization abroad, has fueled enduring scholarly debate. Was the novel truly anti-revolutionary, or was it a more nuanced critique of how utopian ideals become corrupted by power? Some scholars argue that Pasternak did not reject the revolution per se but mourned its betrayal the way the promise of liberation gave way to terror, bureaucracy, and the erasure of personal freedom. His protagonist, Yuri Zhivago, is no counter-revolutionary but a man who seeks meaning not in ideology but in art, love, and nature. His retreat from public life is not cowardice but a form of ethical resistance. The portrayal of historical events has also drawn scrutiny. Critics have questioned the novel's selective memory, its minimal depiction of the Tsarist regime's oppression, its romanticization of the intelligentsia, and its marginalization of peasant and worker voices. Yet others defend this selectivity as integral to the novel's form and purpose. Dr. Zhivago is not documentary history but a work of cultural memory, shaped by emotional truth and lyrical interpretation. As memory studies have shown, recollection is never neutral, it is filtered through identity, trauma, and the need to belong or to resist belonging. Pasternak's memory is subjective, fragmented, and poetic, much like the way trauma reshapes cognition, as explored in cognitive psychology and trauma theory. The novel's episodic structure, its dreamlike sequences, and its recurring motifs, like Lara's theme, which haunts the narrative like a melody half remembered, reflect not historical inaccuracy but the very mechanisms of how the mind preserves what matters. To fully grasp the literary stature of Dr. Zhivago, one must place it in dialogue with other monumental works that grapple with the individual's fate under historical and political totality. Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace looms large in this context. Like Pasternak, Tolstoy wove personal destinies into the fabric of national upheaval, exploring how love, art, and moral choice persist even in the shadow of war. But where Tolstoy maintained a grand, omniscient narrative control offering philosophical reflections on history's deterministic forces, Pasternak retreats into the interior. Yuri Zhivago does not debate history, he suffers it. His journals, poems, and fleeting relationships become the fragile vessels of memory and meaning in a world where official narratives erase the personal. A sharper contrast emerges when comparing Dr. Zhivago to Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, where Solzhenitsyn writes as an accuser, exposing the Soviet state's machinery of repression with forensic detail and moral fury. Pasternak writes as a mourner. His critique is lyrical, not legalistic. He does not document camps or trials but captures the inner exile of the intellectual the way ideology invades the soul, distorting love, language, and selfhood. Solzhenitsyn seeks justice through testimony, Pasternak seeks truth through poetry. This distinction reveals a broader spectrum of resistance in Russian literature. From the existential solitude of Dostoevsky's protagonists to the satirical dissection of power in Zamyatin's We, Russian writers have long explored the tension between the individual and the state. Dr. Zhivago occupies a unique space in this tradition. It is neither prophecy nor polemic, but a song of survival. Its closest kin might be Mandelstam's poetry or Akhmatova's Requiem, works that use aesthetic beauty as a form of defiance, preserving the human where the political seeks to annihilate it. More than 6 decades after its clandestine publication, Dr. Zhivago continues to resonate in an age defined by resurgent authoritarianism, state surveillance, and the weaponization of information. In countries where intellectuals are silenced, where art is censored, and where history is rewritten to serve power, Pasternak's novel stands as a timeless testament to the courage of creative dissent. The very act of writing Zhivago's poems hidden in drawers, memorized, passed hand to hand, anticipates the digital dissidence of today. Encrypted messages, samizdat.blogs, and underground art collectives that preserve truth outside official channels. The novel's themes speak directly to contemporary crises of memory and identity. In an era of deepfakes, disinformation, and algorithmic echo chambers, the question of what is remembered and by whom has become a battleground. As research in social psychology shows, memory is not a fixed archive but a dynamic, socially shaped process subject to collective narratives, selective forgetting, and ideological framing. Dr. Zhivago dramatizes this. The revolution is not one event but many, depending on who tells the story. For the state, it is progress; for Yuri, it is disorientation; for Lara, it is trauma. The novel thus becomes a case study in the politics of memory, illustrating how personal recollection resists, complicates, and sometimes subverts dominant historical narratives. Moreover, the figure of the intellectual in exile, marginalized, surveilled, forced into silence, remains tragically relevant. From imprisoned writers in Belarus to censored scholars in China, the conditions that shaped Pasternak's fate persist. The Nobel Prize controversy, in particular, echoes in modern debates about cultural diplomacy, how states use prizes, publications, and translations as soft power tools or as weapons. The smuggling of Dr. Zhivago by Western intelligence agencies, a fact later confirmed by declassified CIA documents, adds a layer of irony. A novel about artistic freedom was itself instrumentalized in the Cold War's ideological struggle. Yet the novel's legacy endures beyond politics. Its lyrical vision that beauty, love, and personal integrity can survive even in the darkest times offers a quiet but enduring hope. In classrooms, film adaptations, and translated editions, Zhivago's voice continues to whisper, *I am here. I felt. I loved. To understand the profound emotional impact of Dr. Zhivago, one must turn not only to literary criticism but also to cognitive science and trauma theory. The novel's structure mirrors the workings of human memory, nonlinear, associative, driven by sensory triggers and emotional salience. Yuri's recollections of Lara are not chronological but episodic flashes of a glove, a winter coat, a piano melody. This reflects what psychologists call episodic memory, the brain's way of storing personal experiences through vivid, context-rich fragments. Research shows that trauma disrupts normal memory processes, leading to intrusive recollections, emotional numbing, and dissociation, all rendered with startling accuracy in the novel. Lara's recurring nightmares, Yuri's sudden lapses into reverie, and the way past and present bleed into one another reflect the cognitive signatures of psychological survival. As studies on trauma and identity suggest, when external reality becomes unbearable, the mind retreats into inner world streams. Art, memory to preserve a sense of self. The concept of selective memory is also central. Yuri does not remember everything but remembers what matters to him. Aligning with findings in social psychology that memory is shaped by identity, belonging, and emotional significance. The past is not recalled but reconstructed, often in service of present needs. In this light, Dr. Zhivago is not a flaw in historical accuracy but a masterpiece of subjective truth, a narrative built from the cognitive and emotional debris of survival. Furthermore, the novel's lyrical style, the very quality that earned Pasternak the Nobel, can be understood through the lens of emotional cognition. Language that is poetic, rhythmic, and image-rich activates deeper neural pathways than purely informational text, engaging the limbic system, the seat of emotion and memory. When Yuri writes poetry, he is not escaping reality but processing it, his verses functioning as mnemonic devices, emotional anchors, and acts of resistance against historical erasure. In this interdisciplinary light, Dr. Zhivago emerges not only as a novel about history but as a profound exploration of the mind's resilience, showing how, when the world collapses, memory, art, and love become the last frontiers of freedom. Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago is a profound exploration of the human condition, deeply resonant with the tenets of existentialism. At its core, the novel grapples with the existential struggle for meaning in a world often characterized by absurdity and overwhelming historical forces. The philosophical framework of existentialism, with its emphasis on individual freedom, responsibility, and the creation of one's own essence, provides a crucial lens through which to understand Yuri Zhivago's choices and his internal landscape. Existentialist thought posits that human beings are distinguished by the fact that their essence, what they truly are, follows their existence, that is, people are free to, or condemned to, create themselves. This aligns perfectly with Zhivago's persistent internal search for authenticity and his efforts to define himself amidst the cataclysmic sweep of the Russian Revolution. The novel interrogates the very nature of human existence, asking what the basic conditions of life are and how individuals can forge their own meaning from these conditions. Zhivago, as a doctor, a poet, and a man caught in the maelstrom of history, embodies this struggle. His commitment to healing, his lyrical observations of nature, and his enduring love for Lara are all acts of meaning-making in the face of profound suffering and destruction. The existentialist concern with anguish and despair, the feelings of existential crisis that result when people reflect on their alienation from the world, is palpable in Zhivago's internal monologues and his poignant reflections on the fragmented nature of his life. Furthermore, existentialism champions the human capacity for free choice, a capacity that arises from our unique ability to consciously reflect on alternative possibilities. While Zhivago is often swept along by the tide of historical events, his choices, particularly those that prioritize his artistic integrity and his personal relationships over political expediency, are expressions of this fundamental freedom. He grapples with moral responsibility, not in the context of rigid societal dictates, but in the more profound sense of creating his own values and living by them, even when those values lead him into conflict with the prevailing ideologies. Existentialism is not directly concerned with the question, which course of action should one choose? Instead, it addresses a more subtle question. What are the fundamental conditions of human existence and how can man establish his own meaning out of these conditions? Zhivago's life is a testament to this pursuit. A relentless endeavor to find and articulate a personal truth amidst the imposed narratives of revolution. Despite its enduring power and literary acclaim, Dr. Zhivago has not been immune to criticism. A significant area of contention revolves around its portrayal of gender and its engagement with specific historical traumas. Critics have pointed to potential limitations in gender representation, arguing that while Lara is a pivotal character, her agency and development are often viewed through the prism of her relationships with men, particularly Yuri and Pasha. Some analyses suggest that the novel, while deeply empathetic, may not fully interrogate the complexities of female experience within the revolutionary context. Moreover, the novel has faced accusations of historical omissions or a selective focus that can inadvertently downplay certain harsh realities. While it vividly depicts the devastation wrought by war and revolution on individuals, some scholars argue that it sidesteps a more direct confrontation with issues such as widespread anti-Semitism or the stark class dynamics that fueled much of the revolutionary fervor. There is a persistent critique that Pasternak, in his focus on the individual's spiritual and artistic survival, may have inadvertently romanticized suffering or adopted a stance that, while deeply humane, avoids engaging with the systemic injustices and political machinations that defined the era. This perspective suggests that the novel's emphasis on lyrical beauty and personal tragedy might, for some readers, obscure the broader, more brutal political landscape. Analytical Marxism would critique such totality, and relativism accusations hound its postmodern openness, where multiple reader interpretations destabilize meaning, per post-structuralism. While Pasternak's narrative is undeniably rich and multi-layered, its very richness can invite differing interpretations regarding its political engagement and historical comprehensiveness. The enduring relevance of Dr. Zhivago and the rich tapestry of its creation offer fertile ground for future scholarly exploration. Emerging methodologies in the digital humanities present exciting new avenues for analyzing Pasternak's complex work. For instance, AI-assisted thematic modeling could be employed to meticulously map the lyrical patterns and recurring motifs within the novel, offering quantitative insights into its poetic structure and emotional resonance. Furthermore, detailed digital analysis of Pasternak's manuscripts, including his drafts and revisions, could illuminate the evolutionary process of his ideas and the intricate construction of his narrative. Comparative studies with global dissident literature also hold immense potential, placing Dr. Zhivago in dialogue with works from other contexts of political upheaval and artistic resistance, such as those emerging from Eastern Europe, Latin America, or post-colonial nations, could reveal universal themes of individual struggle against oppressive regimes and the redemptive power of creative expression. Such comparisons would underscore Pasternak's contribution to a broader international tradition of literature as a form of witness and resistance. Moreover, future research could delve deeper into the novel's engagement with philosophical concepts, moving beyond a general understanding of existentialism. A closer examination of its intersection with various schools of thought, perhaps exploring specific ethical dilemmas through the lens of virtue ethics or examining its relationship with burgeoning psychological theories of the self in the early 20th century, could yield nuanced interpretations. Discussions of discrepancies among parts of the self and authenticity and internally motivated goals could provide frameworks for analyzing Zhivago's internal struggles. Dr. Zhivago stands as a monumental testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a profound meditation on the agonizing yet ultimately redemptive interplay between personal truth and the relentless currents of history. Boris Pasternak masterfully weaves a narrative that, while rooted in the cataclysmic events of the Russian Revolution, transcends its specific historical setting to explore universal themes of love, loss, art, and the enduring quest for meaning. The novel's lyrical prose, akin to Zhivago's own poetry, elevates the individual's experience to a sacred plane, imbuing even the most desperate circumstances with a profound sense of beauty and significance. The character of Yuri Zhivago embodies the existentialist ideal of creating one's own essence through freedom and responsibility, even when confronted with absurd conditions. His choices, often made at great personal cost, affirm the paramountcy of his inner life, his artistic vision, and his capacity for love amidst the dehumanizing forces of ideology and war. Lara, too, represents a powerful embodiment of human endurance and the search for connection in a fractured world. While acknowledging certain critiques regarding its historical focus and gender representation, the novel's enduring power lies in its unwavering commitment to the individual's struggle for authenticity. It is a work that refuses easy answers, instead inviting readers into a deeply human experience where beauty and brutality, hope and despair, coexist. Ultimately, Dr. Zhivago affirms the redemptive power of art, not as an escape from reality, but as a means of engaging with it, finding solace, and preserving the fragile flame of humanity. It serves as a timeless reminder of the eternal dialogue between the personal and the historical. A dialogue that shapes our lives and defines our very being.